Hello, what is happening everybody? My name is John Denton. Thank you very much for joining me on the channel. And yes, it's another video game review on the channel. I know most of you are music fans. Music will always be the driving force behind this channel. But I want to talk about other subjects as well, and I don't want to throw away 15 years in the video game industry. Yeah, I'm that fucking old. But quickly before we start, if you are new to the channel, if you stumbled across this is your first video with me, please do let me know in the comments, and also please do subscribe. And also all of this content is supported by my brand new Patreon. The movement is moving, people are signing up already. Please do take a look at the link in the description. Have a look what's on offer there. We have different tiers. I have different tiers. There's going to be a lot of extra content up on the Patreon, behind the scenes stuff, and also it does support this channel. And if you want more video game content, supporting the channel in that way is a great way to get it, because then I don't have to be so worried about views, and naturally this is a music based channel, so the video game reviews at the moment, early doors are going to be lower. Right, let's get on with it then. The Outer Worlds. I'm sure you know what this is, but if you don't, this is the new RPG coming from Obsidian, you know, the guys behind Alpha Protocol. You weren't expecting me to say that one first, were you? Fallout New Vegas, second Knights of the Old Republic, all sorts of classic RPGs, and it's actually written by the guys that wrote the original Fallout. You can basically take it, if you really want to reduce it down, it's like a Fallout game set in space without the open world. I think going in, I think it's important to state that this is essentially an indie game. Now Obsidian is now owned by Microsoft, which is why this game is up on Game Pass, and it's a brilliant Game Pass game. Before we even get into scores, before we even get into criticism, Game Pass is an amazing service. This is an amazing Game Pass game. Because of their status as it's kind of, I mean, it is an indie game, they're not an indie studio anymore, you have to accept some sort of limitations. So I like the idea of developers playing to their strengths and hiding their weaknesses. And that's something the Outer Worlds does well. So if you've played Fallout before, you'll kind of know what to expect straight away. It's very Bethesda-like. You're walking up to people, the camera's zooming in on them, the textures are catching up just afterwards, and then you're having conversations with them, trying to work out quests, and then going off on quests and, you know, doing a bit of combat, coming back, dealing with people, double crossing, trying to figure out the correct choices to make in all sorts of situations, and quests layer on top of each other. You know, you'll be following the main story of the game, which, by the way, you're woken up from cryostasis by this crazy scientist, Dr. Phineas, and then he like puts you out on this mission to try and allow more people who are trapped on this ship to be rebirthed from cryostasis, and then inevitably like you meet a billion people along the way. Also, what to expect if you are a fan of Fallout games, this isn't an open world in a traditional Bethesda sense. This is a game where you're kind of put into instant small little open worlds, and this is really where the game starts to fall down, to be honest. Early doors, you just go to a town. The first town's called Edgewater, and it's just quests. Shout out to the fantastic writing in this game. It's witty, it's clever, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. That's going to be a later point. The limitations of the game are hidden early on, because while you'll venture outside the town and walk around a little bit and get into fights, and it is a first-person shooter / melee game, it's all done in a very limited way, and you're mainly just dealing with interactions with people, and that's by far where the Outer Worlds is at its strongest. And so for the first 5 or 6 hours or so, you can get into some really interesting situations. Not only are you dealing with the main story quests, but you'll get into these side quests that are definitely worth exploring, especially for the type of person that's into manipulating people through RPG systems, whether it's leveling up your speech and persuasion and charisma to be able to actually manipulate people to get them to do what you want, or just turning yourself into kind of a hulking brute. Apparently you can play it as an absolute idiot as well, and the people react to you like that as well, so that might be quite funny for a second playthrough. But as the game progresses, and this is where it starts to fall down, you land on a planet about maybe 10 to 12 hours into the game, depending on how much you've done and how many side quests you've taken on, and the planet is called Monarch, and it's by far the biggest area in the game. You could almost argue it is an open world. It's a large area, it has a few different settlements in it, and you're basically tasked with, once again, landing, speaking to the people in charge, slowly figuring out the moral quandary between the two different factions that are there, and you start playing out the same situation you've already done in 2 different areas again, borderline 3 different areas again. However, you're now doing it on a ugly, kind of unpleasant looking planet with large, huge spaces in between the towns. Now, once you've got to the towns, you can fast travel backwards and forwards between them. But in order to get from one town to another, you have to walk or run, and you get into fights along the way, and that's when it really does reveal that the combat's dead in this game. Let's not pretend, the combat is dead. those expecting kind of VATS thing from Fallout will probably be pleasantly surprised by some chunky feeling guns, and there is like a slowdown, a time dilation system, I should say, where you can slow down time and blast people, ways of leveling that up and all sorts of stuff. But honestly, after a little while, the combat just becomes a real chore. Whether you've picked melee, whether you've picked weapons, whatever you've picked, even science weapons which do some funny effects, the AI is just non-existent. It's just dead. The combat's dead. It's good for what it is, an indie RPG, but after a while it's a real slog. And when you're walking between these spaces to go and meet somebody and they immediately set you on another fetch quest, immediately set you on more busy work, oh, it's tiresome. I really thought the game took a massive dip in that area, and even though some of the characters were reasonably interesting, they're not that well drawn. They look like they've been created in a random generator at some point. The animation's basically non-existent. The voice acting is good, but inevitably you do start skipping through the text as well, and the game took a real dip for me there. And it's a shame because, like, you have to give credit. You have to give credit to the quality of writing in The Outer Worlds. It is of a higher level than almost anything else out there. This is a game that some may misinterpret as being anti-corporate or anti-capitalist. It's more, I would say it's far more satirical about that, but it's also satirical about the kind of culture of anti-capitalism as well. I'm not talking about like woke internet culture. It doesn't go into any of that bullshit. It's not that timely, it's not that tedious, it's not that obvious. It's much smarter than that. This is satire written by very intelligent, mature, smart, experienced writers. There's elements of Brexit in there. Honestly, there's elements of a hyper end level capitalism that's being lampooned. You've got anarchy that's being lampooned. Everything's being lampooned. Everything's having holes poked in it. So I think some people who read it as an anti-capitalist piece, I think despite the fact that the game is about essentially the world building is about these corporations that have gone far too far, and definitely is lampooning that, and it's definitely kind of anti the extreme levels of capitalism. It's not an anti-capitalist game. It's not an anti-corporate game necessarily. It is far more nuanced and subtle than that, but it's also funny and witty and smart and daft, and the way that you can interact with the characters and do so many different things with them, it really is a marvel. And I think that is where, when the game's playing to its strengths like that, when you're dealing with good characters in good scenarios, in funny scenarios, that's where it's at its best. And that's where Monarch really felt like a drop off for me, because there's so much at the time where the space in between that is too big, and what you're doing with the characters in that area through a long period of time isn't interesting enough. It's too much of a repeat of what you've been doing before. However, it does pick back up. I stopped doing side quests around that point, around the 15-hour point. I just wanted to mainline the rest of the story. You can probably get through this game. I got through it in about 20 hours. If you really want to rush, you could probably do it in 12, but you kind of be missing the point. If you're really into everything, you could probably do, there's a good 40 to 45 hours in there, I reckon, if you really want to absolutely hammer everything in the game. And of course, there's great replay value. There's a huge decision early on that you can completely change the course of action. It seems like there's absolutely massively different quests if you do that, but also late game, there are big choices to make and different ideas, and also your build makes a big difference. But the choices do really start to matter late game. You have companions with you, not unlike Mass Effect 2. There's companions quests. How you've interacted with different corporations start to make sense. So your choices and actions throughout the world and throughout the experience really do feel like they have some sort of a consequence throughout the end. And unlike, say, a Walking Dead, where you feel like ultimately you're being bottlenecked into the same scenario, regardless of your choices, and maybe there's some characters here and there that are different, this does feel like it's wildly different. And because of that, and because of how strong the ending is, despite the last boss, which is fucking shit and shouldn't have been in there, real poor decision, but at least you can back it down too easy if you want and just get rid of it in seconds and get back to what was interesting about the game, which is talking to people. The fact that the last few hours really does pick things back up, the story's good, everybody's flawed, everybody's interesting, even the big bad has redeemable qualities. There's all sorts of stuff to think about, and it's a game that makes you think about the wider world. Because of that, I ended up feeling like a much more positive about the game than I did during that middle lull. I'm sure some people just get through that middle lull because they just love quests and RPG systems a bit more than I do, and they're kind of happy to do that stuff. But for me, it did let the game down, but it did finish strong. So there we go. My score on this unscripted review right now would be a 7 out of 10, but and also an admirable 7 out of 10. A 7 out of 10 for a studio that knows what it's doing well, plays to its strengths, to the most part, and obviously if you're a Game Pass subscriber, it's definitely something you need to go and check out. And with Bethesda doing an absolute disaster piece at the moment with everything Fallout, oh my goodness, there's no better time for Obsidian to be releasing a game like this. And now they're under Microsoft, maybe Outer Worlds 2, should there be one, can really scale up and deliver. Maybe it's properly open world and like properly go into different star systems, and that would be cool. But because of the way it's segregated, you do lose some of that Bethesda majesty of going, I'm a bit bored with these characters, I'm a bit bored with the combat, I'm just going for a walk. Whereas in this game, if you do that, you almost feel like you're going to meet characters that you would have met anyway, naturally through the story, and you're actually doing yourself a disservice by doing that. That's how I felt anyway. But yeah, 7 out of 10, that's what I'm going to drop on this one. Let me know your thoughts on the game in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on me doing game reviews in the comments. Like I say, 15 years of experience, this comes more natural to me than anything. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you're new. Please do check out the Patreon link down in the description. That is going to be the lifeblood, the life support for this channel, and the more patrons I get, also the more video game content I can do, because of course most of the subs here right now are music fans. And don't worry, music fans, if you're watching any of this, that will always be the driving force of this channel, of course. Right, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. My name is John Denton. I'll catch you on the next video. Peace.